When did you first realize that AI agents are going to change the world?
So this happened, I believe, around 7 months ago, and we've had this client who wanted to connect a ton of BigQuery datasets. It was a marketing agency. They had like this one agent that was connected to a ton of different APIs. After connecting like 7 to 10 APIs or tools to a single agent, it started to get confused. So what I decided to do is split this agent into two. So instead of passing all of that context into a single agent, I just took all the BigQuery context and put it in a separate agent. And then I connected this agent without using any frameworks, without using anything, plain Python code, and it completely removed all hallucinations. This was when I saw that there's definitely something there.
You said that after 7 to 10 tools, the agents start really like mishandling, right?
Yeah, I would say 7 to 10 tools is like the upper limit, but it also depends on responsibilities that you assign to an agent. So for example, if those 7 to 10 tools are all more or less related to one another, and if they all need to be used like together, then I guess you could add 7 to 10 tools or maybe even more. But if those tools are like different, if those tools perform different actions, then this can really confuse the agent.
Yeah, so like the agent basically needs to be like specialized role for one thing.
Yeah, I would say that roles are probably more important than like the number of tools, because if you were hiring like an employee for your own business, I don't like to compare, employees to agents. We can talk about this later. The same way you hire people, you hire them for different roles. You can even, create the same roles for your own business, but those roles would just be taken by agents.
For those who are new to agents, how would you explain the concept of an AI agent and how it differs from a normal LLM like ChatGPT? The best skill you can be learning right now is how to build AI agents, and I could not agree with that more. That's why I created an entire workshop that will teach you how to build and deploy agents. And if you get stuck at any point, guess what? You're in a community of people who do this every single day. So if you want to get ahead of everyone and actually learn how to build agents, then make sure to join. The link is in the description. Also, if you join in the next 4 days, you will get a personalized AI strategy made just for you. Plus, the price is going to increase in 4 days, so make sure to join now. See you inside.
That's a very good question. I think a lot of people get it wrong because, as I said, on the one hand, some people consider agents like automations, and on the other, some people say that agents are your own employees. And I think both are wrong because, first of all, agents have more autonomy than your employees because they can disobey you, because your employees can disobey you. You can provide them with as many instructions as you want, but they can still think about these instructions and do them in their own way. On the other hand, automations, they run constantly on your backend, and however you hard-coded the automation is just going to keep running in the same way over and over. So in my opinion, the closest definition of AI agents that I've ever heard was made by Ondrej, who said that agents are essentially operating systems. And in my opinion, it's crucial to understand this because this significantly affects how you actually develop your own agents. In my opinion, you should never hope that your agent is going to do it all for you. Unfortunately, this doesn't work just yet. You have to ensure that all of the heavy lifting is performed by the tools, not by the agent. This is, in my opinion, the only way to currently make those agents reliable.
So I also heard Ondrej say that he thinks the next evolution of operating systems will be like a LLM controlling the entire computer. Like, do you agree with that?
Yes, I do think that it's a huge opportunity to control your own computer using an agent because, the highest paying jobs are all currently digital. The highest paying jobs are right now performed using our own operating systems like Mac or Windows. And if you could connect an agent to that and make it perform the same tasks using the same programs that we have already developed for ourselves, I believe that could be just an insane opportunity for any business.
So do you think like Microsoft will do that, or do you think it's more like, open source developers?
So there were some rumors that OpenAI is developing something like this. Obviously, it's not confirmed just yet. But I do think in terms of applications, open source will most likely lead the way. I don't think open source will lead the way in terms of developing the most powerful models because there are a lot of resources required in order to train a model like GPTs by OpenAI. But when it comes to the applications, I think, yes, open source can develop the most creative applications, and we have already seen some examples of that.
So speaking of open source LLMs, obviously Llama 3 was released a few days ago. It was a massive news, and it was developed by a huge company, Meta AI, but they made it open source. Obviously, still didn't release the full thing. There is a bigger model to come, and the research paper still hasn't released. But what are your first impressions on Llama 3?
So I think it's definitely a huge leap forward for open source community. And I think people are definitely going to create a lot of applications using this model. However, what we've also seen is that it's much larger than any other open source model that was previously released. So even right now, we maybe have like only one or two clients who have enough resources to fine tune or even to just run 70B model, because running open source models yourself is not as efficient as using commercial APIs, because those APIs are built specifically for these models and they're optimized as much as possible, just so you can pay only for what you use and nothing else. But developing a system like this in production using an open source model is complicated, to say the least. So I think it definitely propels the open source community forward, but also I think it introduces the same problems like commercial models. Like only a few select companies will be able to use the biggest Llama version in production.
And what about using the Grok API?
Well, I haven't personally tested Grok API. If it can actually run effectively models like the largest Llama model, but yeah, there are again can be some cost concerns, because I've heard that Grok, they run on GPUs that require like millions of dollars just to set up and run like any basic models, because of like limitations in terms of memory. You need tons of those LPUs to run like even the smallest model. So even though it can run those models fast, it's probably going to be also a lot more expensive than commercial APIs.
Yeah, I agree. So do you think open source models will like ever catch up? Because you kind of hinted that closed source has the advantage of resources and just closed research, like they can be 1 to 2 years ahead and nobody knows. Yeah. Or do you think like, I don't know, do you think like Meta AI could ever surpass OpenAI? Or do you think like it's always going to be the closed source leading the way?
No, I think it's always going to be a closed source. And the reason for this is because in AI, first mover advantage plays a huge role. So with the amount of data that OpenAI has gathered before anyone else was even aware of the possibilities here, so large that other companies will just find it extremely hard to catch up. And we don't know exactly how many months or years ahead OpenAI is, and we can only guess. But I do think that commercial models will always lead the way rather than open source models, just because of the resources required to train these models, just because of how secretive the space is becoming, and just because of the amount of expertise you need to train such a model.
Yeah. I mean, people don't realize that GPT-4 was finished training in like August 2022, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's almost 2 years ago, so like they have to have something significantly better. Can you tell us the story behind Agency Swarm, your own agent framework? Like what prompted you to create this?
Yeah, so that relates to the story that I told you in the beginning, where I've split one agent in two just using plain Python code, and it significantly improved the results. So that what really sparked the development of Agency Swarm, because you can't scale such a system if you're just using plain code, because every time you would need another agent, you would just have to write a lot of code in order to just handle those low-level details like multi-agent communication. Additionally, after Assistance API came out, just developing those agents has become a lot easier. Before, all of those, like holding the context for the agent, creating the tools, making sure that the agent uses the proper tools, just managing the state of the agent wasn't easy. And we used to have like a database connected to this application where we would store all of those instructions, configs and so on. But with the release of Assistance API, creating agents has actually become so much simpler that it just made sense for me to finally start this project. And yeah, some people thought that it took me like months to develop Agency Swarm, but actually the first draft of Agency Swarm, like the 0.001 release I developed in a week or so. So I
Not bad.
literally built this whole framework. Like most of the code I've developed in a week just because of how simple it became creating agents with Assistance API.
So you are a professional agent developer as your main full-time job. Can you walk us through like how your typical day looks like what are your typical clients, and basically what do you do as an agent developer?
Yeah, so I'm actually not involved into AI agent development myself any longer, at least as much as I used to be, because now I have a team of 15 people and I hire people to develop those agents for me. And me, I just personally primarily work on Agency Swarm and on like playbooks, which is like internal tutorials for my employees on how to overcome different challenges. And anytime our employees encounter any issues, I try to implement fixes for these issues, into the whole framework rather than for each specific project, because like this, I believe I can make much larger impact.
So if I understand correctly, like you building Agency Swarm is like a massive leverage because, you do the heavy lifting, you do all the like coding that's difficult, and then you make a simple framework that anybody can use, and then you hire people, train them on that, and you can get like much more leverage for your time. Is that correct?
Yes, exactly. So instead of me working specifically with every client, I develop more general features that my developers can then reuse for those clients and leverage them to fix any of those smaller issues.
I have a question about Crew AI because right now it's one of the most popular agent frameworks, but you spotted some limitations in it. So what would you say are the main downsides of Crew AI?
So the main downsides of any agentic framework at the moment, in my opinion, is that they all were built as either side projects or as research experiments. None of them were built to actually be used in production. Like my framework, unlike others, originated actually from a real world project. It's not built with production in mind. It's built because we actually use it daily in production. Like all of my developers are developing real world AI solutions using my framework daily, and we get real world feedback from those clients. So we know what their challenges are, we know what features they need the most, and we develop them accordingly. But other frameworks, in my opinion, they are not that realistic. So in my opinion, I just can't see myself using other frameworks where it's like instead of specialized agent roles, you have like, user proxy agent. I don't even know what it means. You have other agents that are like hard-coded inside for you, and the other frameworks are not flexible enough for production applications because they do allow you to get started much faster because there are, prompt templates hard-coded for you. There are even agents like in Crew AI, they have the manager agent hard-coded for you in the group chat setting. And in my opinion, that's just extremely inefficient because when I develop my applications, I want to ensure that they are tailored specifically for each client. And that's, in my opinion, like one of the biggest trends in AI. This is something that we have seen, in 2023, where companies, they don't want to leverage just off-the-shelf AI models. They want to at least enrich them with their own data and fine-tune them for their specific process. Because if you're using like an off-the-shelf agent or off-the-shelf model, anyone else can use it too. And there's nothing special about it. But when you fine-tune those agents, when you tailor them for your specific use case, that's when I believe magic happens. And my framework, although it is harder to get started with, it does provide you with a lot more ways you can customize your systems.
Yeah, I have so many things I want to touch upon. So I think the main distinction I would say is that most of these frameworks were like a cool idea, right? Someone had it in their mind like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if we had like a framework doing this and that? And then you had a completely different approach because you were actually solving a problem that you had and you build it as a solution to that problem.
Yes, exactly.
And also, why is everybody obsessed with like controlling the system prompts? Like my first thought would be to make all of those freely available to the user.
Yeah, controlling the system is also a big question. There's a very thin line between having control and being able to get started fast. Like for example, LangChain does provide you with like a ton of templates and you can get started with a basic RAG application, like 3-4 lines of code. But the problem here is that once you go into production, you typically need to fine-tune the system based on the client's feedback. And when you have those abstractions pre-made for you, it makes it much more challenging. to actually make the system tailored for a specific client. Besides, most of those templates are so easy to implement yourself that, it's not a big time saving. Like if you are developing like a real world project and you are getting paid for it, you probably don't care about spending, extra 2-3 hours to significantly improve your client experience.
Yeah, so like a lot of clients basically could do it for them, and then there would be no need for your like agency that's more advanced, right?
Yes, correct. So ever since I started my agency, and I've been running it for almost 1.5 years by now, I believe, we've never used LangChain. We've never used any templatized libraries for developing LLM applications.
I mean, 15 employees in 1.5 years, that's really good, I would say. So can you like walk us through the initial steps? Like how was it looking at the beginning?
Yeah, honestly, at the beginning, it was just me. At the beginning, it was just me doing everything by myself. So my agency originated from just me being so overworked that I decided that I couldn't do this by myself any longer. Like I used to develop everything by myself, front-end, back-end AI, and I used to have like 7-8 clients that I would just service myself until I just got overworked, completely burned out. And that's when I decided I needed to hire someone. So I then started hiring one by one, slowly. First I started with front-end, then back-end. Then I moved on to like administrative tasks. And now we're outsourcing even management. So I don't even manage projects anymore. We have 2 project managers for this at the moment. And honestly, yeah, it wasn't that smooth of a process. I think AI development agency is like, or just any development agency is definitely like the hardest type of agency model that you can possibly create, because it does require a ton of expertise across many different roles. So you do have to hire like a diverse range of people. For example, we have not only like AI agent developers, obviously we have also front-end developers, back-end developers, designers, and so on. And you have to make sure that all of those people collaborate together effectively. That's definitely not an easy task. And it took me a very long time to make it actually function by itself. So the whole first year I was like, even though I hired people, I was still putting in like 70-80 hours consistently for the entire year, each week. And only now I'm finally starting to see the results where I'm not as involved into like day-to-day operations any longer, and I can like take a week off and no one will ever notice. But it did take me like a huge amount of work and a huge amount of time, huge amount of thinking to get to this point.
Yeah, at the start of any business, like taking a week off, it's like you're almost risking the entire business,
Yeah.
So, okay, I feel like, you mentioned it is the most difficult type of agency, but at the other hand, like that's kind of an advantage because it gives you a large moat, right? Well, everybody can learn how to be a SMMA or whatever. Like not everybody can be a professional like agent developer.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think anyone can learn agent development. At the moment, no, it's just so new that there are no experts in this field right now.
Yeah.
So I'm releasing a video on this soon. Maybe by the time you watch this, it's already going to be on my channel about how to become an AI agent developer. But it is true that, creating your own development agency does require a significant amount of expertise depending on how you structure it.
So if someone wants to get into building agents, what practical team of agents would you recommend them do first?
So I would recommend starting with something that they would personally use themselves. In my opinion, you can find your niche by combining AI with your own interests or passions, because most of the obvious use cases have already been capitalized upon. So if you were to develop like another research agent, you'd be competing with tens of open source commercial projects that already do this exact thing. But if you combine AI with your own passions or interests, that's when you can find, untapped opportunities, and that's when and that will also allow you to move forward much faster because you'll be passionate yourself about what it is that you're building.
Yeah, I think a lot of people get like kind of stuck on going for the big things, right? The big markets, while all of us have like some specific niche expertise, something where we have like a unique advantage. So your advice would be basically to find that and go there and like be in a smaller pond maybe at the start, but like work on something you like and where you have actual expertise.
Yeah, exactly. I think the best way forward would be to find a project that you are extremely passionate about and just build it first for yourself, and then proceed with reusing the experience that you've gained, reusing all of the templates, reusing the code that you've made for yourself to other projects.
Yeah. And with your clients, what LLMs do you mostly use? Like, is there one that you like is the go-to default?
Yeah, of course. Go-to default is OpenAI. Obviously, in my opinion, it's best for building agentic applications because of the function calling feature. Other LLMs also support this function calling feature, but from my experience, it does seem like, OpenAI is the best in terms of doing those function calls. Maybe other providers didn't pay as much attention to it, or maybe they didn't have enough data. But from my experience, definitely with OpenAI, when you use function calling, there are much fewer hallucinations than with any other providers. So that's our default for clients who aren't concerned with data privacy, and for clients that are concerned with data privacy, we actually use Azure OpenAI. So we also deploy models in their own private clusters on Azure, and then we use that. So Azure OpenAI doesn't even share data with OpenAI itself, which typically fixes the issue.
Yeah, because OpenAI promises that they don't train on the API tokens, but you can never be sure, right?
Yeah, I guess. It's not even that, OpenAI doesn't train models. I don't think they would do it if they said that they won't, but it's that most of those companies, they have pretty complex privacy policies and agreements with their own clients where they just can't share data with third parties.
So, I heard the same from small business owners, and then the default go-to is to just use open source models and fine-tune them on their specific data sets or whatever. You think Azure is the same amount of security as that?
Yeah, if you use Azure OpenAI, your data does not even leave your own Azure instance. So it essentially means it's the same as if you were deploying an open source model on Azure.
Okay. You've touched on the people comparing agents to human employees. What would you say are the key differences and then some similarities?
Definitely autonomy is the biggest one, because if you included some specific instructions in the prompt for the agent, it cannot disobey those instructions. It can hallucinate and just not do them, but it probably wouldn't do it in a completely opposite way. On the other hand, your employees, they can consider things and they can do them in any way they want. So you can provide them with as many instructions as you want, but they can still do things differently.
But I feel there is such a sentiment among people, especially on the doomer safety side, where they actually fear that an agent could go out there and do something wild that's completely outside of its instructions. Why do you think that is? Why do so many people believe this?
I think it's just a misunderstanding, because I don't think agent can literally screw you over intentionally. I think it can hallucinate, and if you didn't provide the proper guardrails, that could potentially cause some damage. But the agent on itself, it wouldn't do any damage to you. Try asking ChatGPT on how to make a bomb. We've all tried it, and it's impossible.
Yeah. So where do you stand on the safety debate? Do you think we're going to be fine? Do you think we're completely doomed? Where do you stand?
Honestly, at the moment, I think we are going to be fine, because again, those models are all lobotomized. Literally, they don't answer any harmful questions even right now, and I just don't see how agents we develop could potentially go wild and just do any damage.
It's interesting because when I talk to people, the more advanced they are, the more they are optimistic. And I feel the most pessimistic people are the ones that spend all of their time on Twitter, just interacting with each other. And it's oh my God, what if AI does this? What if it does that? Look at Claude, it's self-aware. I don't know. Why do you think there is such a disconnect between, in the AI community, where a lot of people think that we're completely fine and a lot of people think AGI is happening tomorrow, we're all dead?
Yeah, that's natural. We've all seen Terminator movies, and we all have this misconceptions about what AI is and how far it can go. And I think also it's natural because the advancements in AI in the past year, they were in fact quite groundbreaking, and that's not something anyone have imagined in the past. So it's only natural to think that, other things that we can't imagine now will become reality in the future. And maybe they will. And actually, I'm sure they will. It's just, I don't think that they will align with like the common perception of, what AGI will be. I don't think anyone can know at the moment how exactly it would look like in the future.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Like, there's so many variables, and like the world is more complex than anybody can imagine. It's always like weird when people say like something is for certain, or like, the way the society or the economy will play out is decided. I'm like, we don't know. Like,
yeah,
it's always, I don't know. There is like this confidence people have that they see how it's going to play out. Well, I definitely agree with you. Like, we just do not know. Like, we don't even know what's happening 3 months from now, right? Like,
exactly.
The AI space is so wild that anything can happen.
Exactly, yeah.
So what are the three most common mistakes you see among beginner agent developers?
Right. Definitely trying to make agents, as I said before, perform everything by themselves. Just the way people think about those agents is incorrect. I think they think that they can just create an agent and it will do like everything for you while you chill on the beach and wait until you become a millionaire. That doesn't work, unfortunately, just yet. So, for our agent developers in-house, I always tell them that they need to think about, agents as operating systems, and what this entails is just comparing this, if you were to just compare agents to how you write, your normal programs. If you were to write like a standard Python program that would perform the same task that your agent is trying to accomplish, what you would do is you would typically have like everything in a loop. So you would have your logic, you would have your functions, and they would just be running in a loop until the program is completed, right? So you should think about agents in the exact same way, where instead of the loop, you just have an agent. So all of the logic, all of the functions are the same. You just provide them as tools instead of just running them as a sequence in a loop. And that just gives you a lot more flexibility. It gives your users a lot more flexibility on how this agent can actually execute those tasks. And that does allow you for much more complex use cases.
Okay, so any other, beginner mistakes you see all the time?
Also creating too many agents. It's when I post my YouTube videos, I often do like 2 or 3 agents just to demonstrate the system. But I think I should have been clearer on that typically in production, we don't develop like 2 or 3 agents, and we definitely never start on 2 or 3 agents, because if you create too many agents at first, it's going to make the whole system much harder to debug. Because if you have one agent, you can work with that agent, and if something goes wrong, you know exactly where it went wrong, most likely. But if you have multiple agents and something goes wrong, you would have to modify, you would have to debug 3 agents instead of 1. And that makes in production, that makes things a lot more challenging. In my opinion, you should always start with 1 agent. Don't try to develop like the whole system together at once. Start with 1 agent, make sure this agent works consistently, and then start adding new agents.
Yeah, I think people are just too excited about the visual of like having multiple agents working together and like having their own team of agents. It's like almost you have to like restrain yourself to say like, okay, let's stay focused. This task, okay, it's simple enough. Probably 1 agent is more than is plenty to do that.
Yeah, it does like seem very appealing to people that they can just create like 5 agents, and they think that the more agents they create, the more capable their systems will be. But that's not the case. It's not about creating more agents. It's about making sure that those agents perform consistently.
Yeah, absolutely. And the second thing you mentioned is that agents cannot do everything, which I feel like this is like, again, one of 2 sentiments, right? People, when they first hear about agents, they almost like diverge into agents, okay, it's just automation, it's completely useless. Or they're like, oh my God, like, how can I automate my 8-hour work block with this 1 agent? So like, I feel like there is no like middle ground, there's no balance in here. And people don't understand that building agents, sure, they cannot do everything now, but like in 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, they'll get exponentially more advanced. So learning the skill now, that is the real like value add.
Yeah, exactly. I also think that, you should learn agent development, not just because of what's possible now, but you should be thinking about what's possible in the future. And I definitely see this becoming more and more of a self-autonomous thing, where the agents will actually make more and more autonomous decisions, and they will be able to complete more complex tasks. But for this, a few, I think, important advancements in AI need to happen. The first one is that agents must be able to self-improve themselves. Currently, I haven't seen a single project where this is implemented well or implemented at all. So OpenAI is working on like a memory feature. Hopefully this will move us forward in terms of self-improvement. But to actually make those agents reliable in production right now, you do have to code most of the things yourself.
And how far do you think we are from that?
I think definitely if we are talking like about production ready systems, definitely like a year or two, maybe more. But if we are talking like about just basic agents, like if you want to create like your own assistant, I mean ChatGPT can already sort of do that. You can just tell the ChatGPT builder what you want and it will like create instructions. But as I said, yeah, the most complex process is just creating tools, and creating tools I think will be like something that will take the longest time for AI agents to perform themselves.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, so you mentioned that most of the time it's better to keep it simple with a few agents, but there's been this research paper that it's titled "More Agents is All You Need," where they ran different evals, and basically, like after 10 agents, it started to plateau. But like from going from 0 to 10 agents on something very specific, the results were like always improving. So, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's it makes sense that the results are only improving, because the more agents you add, the more self-reflection capabilities you have within the system. So the more agents you have, the more they can self-correct themselves, and the more they can adjust to circumstances. But when I look at all of those papers, all of the agentic papers and research on AI in general, what people typically don't notice is that all of those enhancements, they provide only marginal improvements. So I'm not sure exactly what's the difference in that specific paper, but for example, in AutoGen paper, when they first released it and they compared it to like GPT-4 and other standard LLMs, the improvements weren't that dramatic at all. They were like very basic, only like a few %. And when you have like 10 agents, like would you really want to pay like 10 times tokens for maybe like 5-10% improvement? So that's that's one of the biggest questions in production. It's not just having the most performant system, it's also considering all the trade-offs like costs, latency, and then the performance.
Yeah, so this is like a common pattern. You see it from the eyes of like actual companies who want to actually deploy this in production. Well, probably these research papers are more like just experiments, more for research and just testing how far they can push different benchmarks, while completely like ignoring the practical side of things.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So before, I think like one idea that I got after like the agents improve sufficiently is that if somebody learns the skill now, they'll be able to start like a relatively big company just by themselves, because once agents can do most of the repetitive tasks, like there will be billion-dollar companies where it's just like 1, 2, 3 people, right? So I think this is the real power of knowing how to build agents, is that once they do get to that level where they can be just as useful as a human, or even like 50% useful, then you can scale your company insanely fast.
I also think that it's not creating new companies where the biggest opportunities will be, but rather automating existing companies. The reason for this is because most of those companies, if you take a billion-dollar company like Google, they have a vast amount of internal documentation and internal processes that they have created over the years. And the problem with LLMs right now is that they never saw this information. So if you wanted to build a company like Google, you would need to know what those processes are in advance. So I think that's why the biggest opportunity, in my opinion, is in automating existing billion-dollar companies. I don't think you'll be able to create, your own billion-dollar company from scratch again, because those LLMs, they never saw any internal data from billion-dollar companies, so they have no idea how these companies should function. But if you do start to automate a company like Google using AI agents, typically your clients, they should provide you with the access to that data, and then it's your job as an AI agent developer to make sure that your agents understand all of those processes and then that they can perform them consistently.
So, you mentioned that GPT 3.5 struggles on 2 tools, GPT-4 like 7 to 10. Do you think like GPT-5 could be 50 tools, and then couldn't that like potentially unlock the constraint on how many tools you have per agent?
Yeah, I do think that GPT-5 will definitely be a lot more capable. I'm again not sure about what the cost and latency implications there would be. I would much rather want OpenAI to develop something smaller, if we're talking like the same difference in terms of the number of parameters as GPT 3.5 and GPT-4. If we had something like this with GPT-5, obviously it would perform much better and would have like 50 tools, but I'm not sure if any of my clients would want to use the system. Like even right now GPT-4 can sometimes be a bit expensive. Again, depends on the process, depends on like what role you're trying to automate, but we do encounter issues where GPT-4 can be too expensive even now. So I hope that OpenAI will move more in terms of efficiency rather than just scaling the models in size.
But like over the last few years, that doesn't really seem to be the case, right? Because you have Meta who does make these smaller models that are more efficient, and like Claude also released in 3 different sizes, but like it seems like OpenAI just releases one big one.
Yeah, that's true, and I guess there's some competition that makes those model providers release bigger and bigger models just because they have to show that they perform better on certain benchmarks than the previous version, and that can be achieved much easier if you just scale the model in terms of parameters. Efficiency can also manifest not just in like changing model architectures, but also changing the hardware. So I do hope that as this whole space continues to develop, we're not just going to be improving in terms of model architectures and in terms of model architectures, but also in terms of hardware. And I hope that our hardware will become more efficient and the cost of compute will go down. So then maybe in the next couple of years we'll be running GPT-5 models even cheaper than we're running GPT-3 right now.
And also people don't realize that everything, like all the models currently that are out there, they've been trained on like 2-year-old hardware, right? So like it's not even like they're using the latest NVIDIA Hoppers or like Blackwells. It's usually like A100s or maybe a few H100s, right? So like even just using the current level hardware with no architectural improvements, that alone could be like a huge step.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so what do you think OpenAI is waiting for? Because they clearly have something better, but it seems like they're kind of letting others steal away. I think Claude 3 probably stole like millions in API tokens from them. So like, what are they waiting for?
Yeah, I think it's again the safety concerns. So they've had some issues with their board, which is one of the signs. And I think also the release of Assistance API, it wasn't that big of a deal. And now they released Assistance API V2, which is already a lot more usable in production. So I do think that they have something internally that they haven't released just yet, and they just want people to get used to the current systems, to the current capabilities of these models first, which is why I think they're releasing the new developments in Assistance API so slowly.
So you mentioned Assistance API multiple times. Can you explain for people what that is who never used it?
Yeah, Assistance API is essentially a new way for you to create agents directly on OpenAI, where instead of you having to manage all of the underlying logic, state management, like for example, adding messages to the LLM, then running this LLM, getting a response, and managing like the conversation history, the state of your agent, you can just use their endpoint and they will do this all for you. So they will run your agent for you on the backend. They will execute certain internal tools. They will keep the state of your agent on their side, and they will also keep the conversation history. And that just simplifies the agent development in general.
But the critics would say like you're trusting OpenAI way too much, because if something happened there, your agent team would be screwed. So what do you say to that?
Well, first of all, yeah, I do understand that I'm trusting OpenAI too much. And, in this field, you do have to make certain bets. You do have to, I'm doing this consciously. So I understand that I'm trusting OpenAI so much, but only because I believe that OpenAI is ahead of everyone else And I believe that OpenAI actually understands AI agent developers better than any other model provider. However, it's not like you are tied to Assistance API. If you want to switch, I mean, yeah, your agents will still be on OpenAI side, and you probably wouldn't be able, if OpenAI goes down, which I hope never is going to happen. If OpenAI goes down, you will have to recreate your agents from scratch, but you can still use Assistance API format with other open source model providers, because I'm currently working on this functionality for my own framework. There were a few open source projects that just mimic how Assistance API work that you can run locally and even use with open source models.
This goes back to the open source, closed source debate. But big picture, do you think it's safer if the main models are closed source? Do you think it's safer if they're open source? Where do you stand on this whole debate?
In terms of safety, I do think it would be safer if OpenAI did open source all of the models. But obviously I'm not an expert on safety, and I do think, that open source models will be safer for the world in general, but I also don't know, what's going on internally in OpenAI. Only a few people do, and I'm sure that they had, their own reasons to not make them open sourced.
Yeah, I think that was kind of connected with the non-profit side, right? Because they were struggling to get the funding, and then Sam flew to Seattle to sit with Satya Nadella, and I think probably Microsoft wasn't willing to invest the initial $1 billion if everything was open. But we don't know. So yeah. But I definitely think that personally, I absolutely agree that open source is going to be safer, because purely from the amount of people, right? So even OpenAI, how many people do they have on their red teaming safety teams? 20, 30, maybe 50. If you open source something, put it to GitHub, millions, tens of millions of people can look through it and spot something, the model going rogue or whatever it is, right? So I think the sheer amount of eyeballs on the project can be greatly increase safety in the long run.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I agree.
So this is interesting. In your video, you kind of predicted that Devin, the AI software engineer, would fail, but I suppose nobody could know just how fast that would happen. How did you make that prediction?
Devin definitely has, its own use cases, and I'm sure it will be useful for a certain user base. But at the same time, I don't really understand why they're calling it an AI software developer if you have to control it for every single task. So it's, in my opinion, not autonomous enough to call as an AI software developer. And the reason I didn't predict, it would fail, because I'm not sure if it failed yet, because no one has access. But
true.
Yeah, but
it's very interesting. They don't give out access.
Yeah, but I just noticed that there were some inconsistencies. There was, another video by Internet of Bugs where he just went into a lot more details, and he analyzed a different video. I wish I have taken a look on that as well before I released my video, but there were obviously some inconsistencies in all of their demos, where they hid the timestamps on the main demo, and where they didn't show the chat window, because I've talked to some of my friends and they didn't even realize they were prompting the agent for almost every single action. Yeah,
the demos definitely didn't give enough transparency on what they were doing with Devin. It just made it seem, and I was in the same trap as you, it was kind of all this excitement that you almost have to talk about it. And Internet of Bugs, amazing video, by the way, went super into detail. That is almost impossible to do when you're covering the news, right? Looking at every screenshot, trying to replicate it yourself and all that. Why do you think they did that? Is it just the hype? Because it seems they have a very elite team. It's not some amateurs. They're international programming Olympiads, completely elite team of players. I don't think they have to do this.
Well, there's definitely some pressure. As I said, the AI space is moving extremely fast, and everyone has to show something that would, make a splash in the industry. And right now it's becoming harder and harder to do that. So everyone is always trying to show the best use case scenario. People don't show the worst use case. They don't show the 10 previous attempts that were made in order to film that one demo video. And I mean, yeah, that's understandable because there is a lot of competition. And obviously if you show the best video, you are going to get a lot more benefits. You're going to get more exposure, you're going to get more funding possibly, and that will allow you to also move faster and then hopefully actually achieve, that demo video where the agent would actually perform it consistently.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably common among all demo videos. I think probably the best execution was by Sora, where they just said on Twitter hey, tell us the prompts and we'll create it, and then they send out the video. So there was no way of generating 100 different tries and using the best one.
Yeah, definitely. I love OpenAI's approach actually to the demos. They rarely show the best use case without showing the worst ones, and they always have a limitations section, which makes me trust them.
Yeah, I agree. I think OpenAI is doing the balance of showing the potential of this technology, but staying realistic. I think they're doing it probably the best.
Yeah.
I also think just to close up on the Devin thing, I think the fact that Cognition AI wasn't really giving out access except for a select few people, I think that should have been the first sign that something is wrong. Because, if they release something that truly groundbreaking like this, why not just, make it, even if they made it $300 a month, right? Whatever, people would still pay it, right? So I think the fact that it was super difficult, even for content creators to get access, I think that should be the first red flag. It's not as good as in the demos.
Yeah, exactly. I think if they were confident in their own capabilities, they would just make it open source. There are already some projects that try to mimic Devin, and if you really have that powerful of a team, you're most likely still going to always be ahead of everyone else. And open source can actually even give you a boost in terms of what you can create on a lot of useful feedback. So in my opinion, if they were confident in their system and confident in their own capabilities, they would just make it open sourced.
I absolutely agree. So going back to AI agents, what are some of the most common use cases you see for AI agents?
And yeah, good question. What's surprising to me in our agency, in our daily agency operations, is that we actually don't have that many common use cases. And in my opinion, that's the best part about AI agents, is that every single company, they, as I said before, they don't want to reuse existing agents. They all want to create something special specifically for them. And each company has different processes. They all use different tools. They all use different instructions. And that what I think makes the agent development really stand out, is that we don't deliver agents from templates. Our agent developers create almost every single system from scratch, and there's rarely anything that you can reuse. Even if you have the same agent, the same accounting agent, for example, for two different companies, there's almost nothing similar between them except for the name.
Yeah, I mean, I always struggle to answer that question when someone asks me what are the most common use cases. So it's good to hear that you as an actual agent developer sees the same way, that everybody has their own use case that they want. It's not there's these 5 use cases that you can just build the agents for and then resell them into every company.
Yeah, I mean, getting some experience developing AI agents is definitely helpful, because the process itself is the same for almost every client, but the agents, the results that the clients get are very different.
So you mentioned that you have a 15-employee team. Where did you learn the most about entrepreneurship, about scaling management, all that?
Primarily books. I read a lot of books, and I try to implement as much as possible from these books as soon as I read them. So definitely I've had a few influences. I've also attended, I've bought a few expensive courses, for example, Growth Academy. And also just iterating, and making sure that you listen to feedback not only of your customers, but your own employees. And then you have to adjust the business, build your own processes. So definitely, experience and just reading books and looking for, outside material like courses and tutorials.
So what's your favorite business book?
So I would say it's Buy Back Your Time by Dan Martell, who also is the creator of the Growth Academy, which I was a part of. And It just tells you, it gives you a framework for how to hire people, how to scale, and that was invaluable to me because, experience is important, and there are some things that you can't find in courses and books, but there are also some things that would take you years to find out on your own.
Yeah, I definitely need to read that book because right now I only have one employee, and it's starting to be, a bottleneck when scaling. So thanks for that recommendation.
Of course, yeah, it will change your life. Anyone who's trying to, gather a team, I highly recommend that book.
What's the main benefit of using multi-agent frameworks as opposed to just one agent?
Yeah, so the first one and the biggest one, in my opinion, is the scalability, and that, sort of goes back to what I said before about debugging the entire system. Is that we start with one agent, but the best part is that you can add more agents as needed. So you can start with the one agent, and you can build like a very simple MVP, a very simple system. But then obviously all of our clients, they rarely stop on a single agent, and as they see like the tangible benefits, they want to add more agents. And when you have a multi-agent framework, instead of rebuilding the whole system, anytime you need to modify it and then debugging it all over again, you can just add another agent and just leave all the previous agents as they are. So that allows you to scale seamlessly. Less hallucinations. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, less hallucinations kind of ties back to performance. Is that when agents self-correct themselves, they can adapt and they can recover from mistakes better.
So like when do you usually see like, okay, we need to add another agent? Like what is that step? Is it the number of tools or is it something else?
Yeah, two reasons. One is if the current agent starts to hallucinate, and the second one if the client just wants to expand the system.
So personally, I have not used Agency Swarm yet. What is the first project you would recommend me to build?
Again, something that you would personally use. So think about, I don't know, if you're editing videos, maybe you would need like a few agents, one for research, who would bring out like the latest videos from YouTube and then summarize them for you. Another agent that would maybe help you write like plans for your YouTube videos, for podcasts like these, and then just connect those agents using like one main CEO agent and just try to build like, some tools, try to connect them to external APIs and then iterate on the system until it works consistently, like you would actually use it daily for yourself.
Yeah. And would you recommend using GPT-4 there? Because from my experience, Claude 3 or even Gemini are much better at like creative writing than GPT-4.
Yeah. So what you can do if you want to use a third-party model at the moment, as I said, I'm working on this new functionality and adding it to my framework right now, where you'll be able to use other models, open source and commercial ones like Gemini. But at the moment, what you can do if you want to use like different model for a specific task is you can just wrap it in a tool. So you can use like the main agent with GPT-4, but then you can create a tool, for example, generate plan or generate script for a YouTube video, and the main agent will be able to run this tool, and then inside this tool you can use any other model you want.
Yeah, that's actually a really good tip. Kinda like this a little hack that basically the tool is just calling the API, but like GPT-4 is still the main agent.
Yeah, we use this very often actually in our day-to-day operations. Like if you are writing an article, you would probably have like your own format for this article, or you would want to have like your own pre-made prompt. But when you make the main agent generate the whole article from scratch, the prompt will always be different. So because those agents, when you converse with them based on circumstances, based on the flow of the conversation, based on the previous messages, it's always going to generate a different article for you. But when you have your own prompt inside the tool, you can get a lot more consistent results.
So this is actually a really good insight you said, that the main agent should actually almost do anything. And I've seen this is like super common among beginners, that they don't build any tools and they just try to agent to do something like zero shot basically.
Yeah.
So like this is I've seen this all the time where people just like, because building tools takes time, obviously. That's probably one of the hardest parts. People just try to like get the agent to do everything in the LLM prompt instead of like calling a function for that.
Yeah, it just easier this way, I guess. But yeah, as I said, you do have to learn how to create tools, and that's the most challenging part of any agentic system. So if, I were to compare, two AI developers, I would probably hire the one who can create better tools.
Yeah, definitely. So this is a small tactical question. What temperature do you use in your agent, like for the LLM?
It depends on the use case again. So if it's, a problem-solving use case, then we use lower temperatures, and actually that was just recently released in Assistance V2. So I haven't even added, temperature controls in the latest release just yet. I'm working on this in another branch. So it's already in agency swarm, but it hasn't been released just yet. And I was actually, surprised by the fact that OpenAI used 1 as the default for temperature.
For the API?
Yeah, for the API, because we personally never use 1 for any agentic systems. And that was quite a limitation, to be honest, with the V1 of Assistance API. But now when you finally can control the temperature, we're definitely going to keep it, my default for my framework will be somewhere between 0.1 and 0.3, because a lot of people say that temperature is like creativity, but it's not really creativity. It's more like randomness. Sure, it can provide the results that would be sort of more creative just because they're more random, but it's not the same as creativity. And for agentic systems, hallucinations are much larger problems. So for agentic systems, I would always recommend keeping temperature much lower, below 0.3, and probably even 0 if you're developing any coding agents of some sort.
And that's crazy that they defaulted to 1 because I think ChatGPT has 0.7, right? So my thought would be in the API would be closer to 0. Why would they make it higher?
Yeah, it would make a lot more sense if they just set it to 0.
Yeah. And by the way, that's a really good point on the creativity, because that's an easy way to explain it, but it's not necessarily true. It's just sampling less probable tokens, right? So by opening up the temperature higher, for those who don't know, it's basically just giving more chance to less probable next tokens, next words. And that might seem creative, but as you said, in reality, it's just more random and less probabilistic.
Yeah, I think when we write articles, or when we think about creative problems, there are certain specific parts of the article of the problem where you need to be more creative, and there are certain parts where you shouldn't be more creative. So although it can result in some form of creativity when you increase the temperature, I also think that just the general direction of the article is what really determines the creativity. It's not the word choice.
Okay, so before you touched on the importance of building good functions and knowing how to do that, there is a lot of people that are pessimistic about learning Python, learning programming, because they think that AGI is going to replace all of that, and in 2 years it will not be useful. What do you say to those people?
Well, first of all, if you learn programming, you will have much better understanding on how not only AI agents work, but how the technology works in general. And that just gives you a whole new perspective on how you actually interact with this technology. So even if I wouldn't recommend, learning how to build AI from scratch in 2024, but I would still recommend just at least having an understanding of how these models work. And the same applies to programming. If you at least understand the basics of programming, you can, even when AI takes over, you can still create much more robust use cases, and you can apply it much better. So, and also I don't think that AI is going to replace programmers completely. I think it's just programmers are going to start collaborating more and more with AI, and we already see such IDEs, AI first IDEs like Cursor, where you can literally code just by using natural language. And I believe that is definitely going to be a thing moving forward. But I don't think that just telling AI what to do and then hoping it's gonna do it all correctly without ever verifying what it actually done is probably at least a decade away from us.
Yeah, it's Like when people don't know anything about programming and they want to start getting into it and they hear somebody recommend they learn programming, I think in their mind it's like goes right away to like building their own compiler, like something super crazy, right? But like from what I understand, if I understand you correctly, it's like no, like learn the basics, learn the fundamentals. You have to understand what a for loop is, you have to understand what variables are, and like just knowing that, the basics of Python, that's like a huge unlock already.
Yeah, exactly, because those AI coding tools, they give you a huge advantage already. So I personally don't even like code as much anymore. I literally just check code provided by AI. But in order to check code provided by AI, I have to at least have some idea of what it does. Just at least like some very basic idea, just so I know like which questions to ask.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think everybody should learn the basics of Python, the basics of programming. And I mean, my answer is that it never hurts to know more skills, right?
Yeah.
So how should businesses think about integrating agents into their operations?
Well, definitely thinking in terms of real world entities like employees is helpful, because that just gives them like a framework on how to approach various projects within their business. Because, you know, if you were thinking about agents in terms of automations, even it would be much harder for you to find like a specific process that you would want to automate. But if you think about agents in terms of roles, in terms of specialized roles, you can then find those use cases much faster. You can see that, you know, you have an accountant who is constantly overworked, working on things that can be easily done already by AI. So you create a similar agent and you call it again accounting agent, and you just outsource this entire process. But it's also important to understand the limitations, because as I said, it wouldn't be like your own employee. So although it can adapt to circumstances, there's always a chance of hallucinations. There's always a chance that it might not handle a specific situation in a right way. So I think agents, they should work alongside your employees. They shouldn't replace them, or they shouldn't just run on the back end constantly. So agents should collaborate with your employees. So instead of you like thinking that you can outsource or just hire an AI agent instead of your accountant, you should think about it as a helper for your employee. So anytime, you know, in our agentic systems, we always make sure that our agents can ask the person who is responsible for the process in case if they don't know on how to proceed.
Yeah, I think a lot of people have this notion that like agent instantly replaces an employee, but like, and again, you said this, Sam Altman said this, it's more like just making the current employees more productive. Because if you have somebody who's already a really good employee, why would you just fire that person, right? You can get them to build some more agents and like get them even more productive.
Yeah, exactly. So that person can just control this agent instead of, you know, doing all of those tasks by himself or herself. He can just control the employee and then move on to more important tasks.
So when you see businesses, like, you know, almost every business wants to implement AI, but a lot of them are doing it just because of the AI hype, or of the AI wave. That, you know, same as it was like in the .com bubble, every business wanted to add .com at the end of their business name. Right now, it feels like every company wants to just say they're AI powered or something. So what businesses should not implement AI?
I honestly don't think there is a business that shouldn't implement AI. So,
or like, what is the wrong way to, you know, implement AI? Like basically like just doing it for the sake of saying you have AI.
Yeah, definitely doing it for the sake of AI is wrong, but I do think that every single business will benefit from some form of AI integration, and I think that it will affect every single industry. The wrong way to implement AI is, yeah, as you said, would be just not really planning, maybe doing it all in-house, which is like the problem we're trying to solve. Because even though, you know, even if you have developers in-house, most of these developers, again, they are not that familiar, most likely, with the latest AI technologies, and they don't understand them correctly. So they might start with, you know, not that
GPT-2.
Yeah, they might start with less valuable use cases, and they might start from use cases that will take you much longer to implement without providing a consistent ROI.
But this is like almost a theme. Like there's so many people in the tech space that don't even have, you know, ChatGPT Plus subscription. Like I'm always mind blown when I hear about someone being a machine learning scientist or researcher that doesn't really use the latest tools. Like, why do you think this phenomenon exists?
I mean, I guess some people can just be a bit ignorant, and when ChatGPT came out, some people thought it was like a fake, or some people thought just didn't believe it was possible and never wanted to try it. But AI is definitely going to affect everyone's lives. It already honestly affects everyone's lives, even if you don't notice it. AI already does affect you, because most likely, even if you're working for someone, most likely your employer already knows about AI, and he or she probably already starts to leverage this technology. And the efficiency benefits that AI provides are also indisputable. So if everyone in the world is more efficient, I mean, you can't stay at the same place. Like, if everyone's becoming more efficient, if your competition is becoming more efficient, then you also have to improve yourself and somehow leverage this technology, because otherwise you're just going to be left behind.
I absolutely agree. I think people, no matter what their position is, knowing how to use AI is already a huge advantage. And as you said, if that employer, the boss, is looking at the entire team, it's like, okay, this guy always knows the latest stuff out there. He always learns it insanely fast and can use it. But the other guys, like, they don't really care about, learning the new stuff. Like, that alone, even if maybe you have less years of experience or something like that, that alone, I think it's a huge plus in any manager's or, leader's eyes.
Yeah, definitely. I personally buy, ChatGPT Plus subscriptions for all my employees, and I also have like my own SaaS platform where I'm right now like creating specialized agents for each of the roles in my company, not to replace them, but to just work alongside them, so they can ask questions from these agents, and these agents will have access to all of the information, all of the playbooks for this specific position, which I think is a huge advantage.
I mean, I think you're doing like the exact opposite of replacing your employees. I think you're like making them super powered, because like you are like the brains of the operation. You're building the agency swarm, all the other tools, and then they can just use it in their day-to-day, saving them time and getting even more achieved.
Yeah, definitely. I think overall, obviously, AI is going to be huge for our economy and for the world in general. I think it's, in my opinion, it's definitely going to make all of our lives better. Some people might experience some discomfort maybe at first, because again, the AI is just developing extremely fast, and no one has expected anything like this even just a couple of years ago. But I think once the world adapts in the future, we all will be better off.
Yeah, I think this is like the best way to explain to people, because like it's much better to suffer a bit of short-term discomfort, right? Maybe altering your path or like learning a new skill, than long-term suffering of like in 10, 15 years, seeing that you completely missed out on this opportunity and that your thing was replaced purely because you refused to learn something new.
Yeah, definitely.
So what's your definition of AGI, and when do you think it will be created?
I'm not sure about the definition. I don't think anyone has a proper definition for AGI yet. And I think like even the smartest minds in the world, they still don't have this definition. So, and when it will be created, in my opinion, I think in the next decade it's possible, but again, I'm not sure. And it will depend heavily on the definition.
Yeah. So you're not like in the AGI 2025 camp?
No, I'm not in the AGI 2025 camp, but again, it's hard to determine, what AGI truly is. I don't think like if we're talking like consciousness, I don't think consciousness will be created in the next decade. But if we're talking like about autonomous robots who can perform in the real world, just like we do, then yes, then that could definitely happen before 25.
So how can people in the AI community prepare themselves for AGI, for the post-AGI world?
Well, post-AGI world is definitely going to be interesting. There are definitely going to be some developments that we can't even imagine right now, because once we have AGI, there's basically going to be no need for human labor whatsoever any longer. So of course will be a lot of philosophical questions that will arise. For example, I'm sure we will have like a crisis of purpose if we do reach AGI like that fast, because people just won't be able to adapt. People right now find, fulfillment in what they do, but once the world no longer needs their skills, I think it will be definitely a very hard thing for a lot of people to comprehend.
So you think like a slow takeoff is better for humanity?
Yeah, I think slow takeoff is better, but some positions, some jobs will take extremely long to replace anyway. For example, if we take like factory workers, to rebuild all of those factories will take more than a decade anyway, because right now all of the factories, all of the infrastructure that we've built, even like how our cities are structured right now, it was all made before this technology could ever even be conceived as possible. It will definitely take extremely long time to replace workers who are working on like manual jobs, but it will be much faster to replace people who are working from home, who work solely from their computers.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree. I think people underestimate like how much friction there is in the physical world, because like, developing software is much faster than developing robots and factories. So I absolutely agree with you there. There is like this notion that when AGI gets created, the moment it's created, like all jobs disappear. But
Yeah.
that's like completely delusional, I think.
Yeah, definitely it will take decades for manual labor, and even for digital workers, even for people who work from home, it will still take some time, because as I said, you currently do have to fine-tune agents on internal business processes. So it's not like your employee, as soon as AGI is achieved, will be able to just push a button and then forget about all of his or her employees. But it will definitely require still some time to make sure that your company operates like it did before, using AI agents, because you will have to somehow fine-tune them. You will have to provide them with the process and make sure they actually understand what your business does and how to achieve it.
Okay, so last question, and this is completely off topic. In one of your videos, you said that you only eat meat and nothing else. So are you on a strict carnivore diet?
Yes, I have been on keto diet for 4 years, and recently I've also started carnivore diet. So right now I've been for like 8 months straight on carnivore meat and nothing else, and I haven't eaten any sugar for like 4 years. And also, like before, I used to do like extreme intermittent fasting, where I would just eat like once a day for around 3 years. I'm not doing like intermittent fasting as much anymore, because there are some health issues that can arise from that. But I'm still like strictly on carnivore, and I've been in ketosis for like the last 4 years, and I think it makes me perform best.
Well, I think we can wrap it up here. Thanks for coming on the podcast, Arsen. I think it was an amazing discussion, and I think what you're doing with Agency Swarm is really on the right track. Like, if you want to plug anything, now is the time.
Yeah, I mean, if you are interested in using Agency Swarm, you can check out my YouTube channel, and I'm gonna certainly release the Assistance V2 update, so a lot of exciting stuff coming up.
Okay, so thank you for coming on the podcast.
Of course. Thanks for having me.